I am ashamed of the president of the United States, and I have been ashamed of many presidents of the United States in my lifetime for their unequivocal support for the state of Israel. It is why in the larger progressive movements here in the United States, we make a connection between the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the struggles of other marginalized people here in the United States. As you just mentioned, we have been fighting for Medicare for all, for a healthcare system that ensures that all Americans and all people who reside in the United States have access to health care. They tell us we're idealistic. They tell us we don't have the resources to build schools in Chicago or to keep clinics open in parts of the country. They tell us we don't have money for infrastructure and we don't have money for access to higher education. But we have millions of dollars and trillions over the last decade to send to Israel to continue the brutal, illegal occupation of the Palestinian people. The spokesperson for Joe Biden, Ned Price, should be ashamed of himself when he was asked multiple times and pressed multiple times by American journalists about the Palestinian children who are being massacred, whether or not Palestinians too have a right to defend themselves. And I say here as a Palestinian, but also as an American, that I believe that the Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves and that we as taxpayers need to stand up and come together and demand that Congress could either, I will say end all military aid to Israel. So let me be clear about my own position. But at the very least, to condition military aid to the Israeli government. We do have a piece of legislation here that's been presented by Congresswoman Betty McCollum from the great state of Minnesota. It's a bill that basically conditions aid to Israel and says that Israel cannot use taxpayer dollars to continue annexation, to detain Palestinian children. And even that, Liam, is controversial. The thing that really outrages me, and I talk about this all the time, is we can criticize any nation in the world. As you know, I am known here in the United States as one of the most prominent progressive activists. And every day when I wake up in the morning, I critique the US government. I organize around progressive legislation. I elect progressives into office. And I criticize my country because I love the United States of America. And I know that we have the potential to be better and to do better. For some reason, when you are critiquing the state of Israel, it becomes controversial. We are silenced here in the United States of America. Our voices are marginalized. We also have, it's not just, rhetoric, it's actual pieces of legislation that are passed across the country to stop our efforts of engaging in boycott, divestment, sanctions of the state of Israel. We don't know what's left to do. We don't want Palestinians to defend themselves. We abhor and condemn violence. But when the Palestinian civil society comes up with a solution that is nonviolent, like boycott, divestment, sanctions, that too becomes controversial. And there are actual people in power who are suppressing our constitutional rights to engage in that type of activity. And so I'm ashamed of Joe Biden. And to be clear for folks who are watching here from the United Kingdom or even folks in the United States of America, none of us who are working to oust Donald Trump from the presidency of the United States of America believed that somehow Joe Biden was some champion for marginalized people or thought that Joe Biden was going to be a champion or different on Palestine. Unfortunately, we had some very hard decisions to make because we truly believe that Donald Trump and those that were around him were fascist. They were terrorizing immigrant communities in this country. We were watching how emboldened white supremacists were becoming in the United States of America. We watched the moving of the embassy under the Donald Trump administration. So we were working to remove Donald Trump, but we never believed that Joe Biden was going to be a champion on foreign policy. What we're hoping happens here in the United States is that over the next 4 years, that we continue to build political power, that we continue to change the hearts and minds of the American people. And that when we come to 2024, that we can really put somebody in office that truly aligns with our values and principles. And Liam, we started to see that our work and the fruits of our labor. Just the last few days, you watched members of the United States Congress on the House floor giving speeches that we'd never heard before, that literally it was historic, watching Congresswoman Cori Bush from Ferguson and St. Louis, Missouri, watching Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Mark Pecan and watching, so many, Jan Chakowski, watching Mary Newman, watching, so many members of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course. So this is something that we haven't really seen in our lifetime. And so our organizing works. Our organizing is producing for us. And so I am calling on our movements to stay steadfast, to continue to speak up for the Palestinian people. And if you didn't know about what was happening in Palestine, you do know now. And you cannot turn away from us now and from the Palestinian people. And so that is the kind of hope that I have in this moment, that we're truly coming to a moment where the work that people have done for decades, including Mustafa Barghouti and so many others that have been talking about Palestine, the many Palestinian elders in the United States that have been working towards this moment, we are finally seeing some of the fruits of our labor. Of course, that means that our people in Palestine, in Gaza and in the West Bank continue to live under terror. They continue to be humiliated, dehumanized, murdered. But the Palestinian people are a resilient people. They are a people that teach life. Even amidst this trauma, even amidst this terror, we watch them still go to Jerusalem and still try to celebrate Eid, which was the end of Ramadan. We are watching the children of Palestine speaking up, telling their stories. We are watching the usage of social media to show the atrocities that are happening to the Palestinian people. And so while my heart mourns, while my heart is broken, I know many of you are feeling the same, I still feel hope and resilience, and very proud to be a Palestinian American, a first generation. My family and both my parents are from a village in the West Bank called El Bire. And I have had the honor to go back to Palestine many times and to be able to be in a land, to understand the importance of land to the Palestinian people. Being a granddaughter of a Palestinian woman who watched me as a Palestinian American stand on the biggest stage in this country at the Women's March on Washington. Rashida Tlaib is our great-great-grandmother's wildest dreams manifested. So I'm feeling hopeful, Liam, and that hope does not come from the U.S. government, who is complicit in the atrocities that happen to the Palestinian people. My focus right now, Liam, is on solidarity, and solidarity is the most powerful weapon we have against the oppressor. Black Palestinian solidarity in the United States is probably the most threatening form of solidarity and weapon against what is happening in Palestine, but really to address fascism and racism and supremacy all over the world. And so, as many people know, as a Palestinian American, I'm actually not really well known for my organizing around Palestinian rights in the United States. I'm actually known for working on the front lines against police brutality, working with families who have lost their children to police violence here in the United States, who often are Black or Latinos. And to see the type of solidarity coming out from Black voices is very important. The bottom line is Kamala Harris has to catch up with our Black Lives Matter movement, our movement for Black lives, our racial justice movements, whatever people want to call them. If Kamala Harris thinks that she's going to run for president in 2024 and not align on issues of justice and racial justice and equality across the world, it's just not going to work. And so for me, again, I'm not expecting much from this administration. I never expected much from this administration, particularly not on the issue of Israel-Palestine. We were really, Liam, in a conundrum. I mean, we didn't really have any choice in this matter. And I know that a lot of leftists and folks, look at us and say, stop telling me, vote, between the lesser of two evils. But in fact, what we believed as organizers in the United States, that it wasn't the lesser of two evils, that it was literally fascist and someone who was also horrible on the issues, but happens to not be a fascist all the way. That's really what we were voting for here in the United States. But I think, again, and I believe the same in any country who has a democracy, all politics are local. And so watching the emergence of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and even watching even on a state level here in the United States, emerging democratic socialists who are winning office across the country, watching the rhetoric that is now happening that is more empathetic to Palestinians, and really watching the debate that our very own Senator Bernie Sanders in the United States running for president brought to the highest echelons of the Democratic Party. So again, we have a lot more work to do, Liam. I'm not really counting on this administration, unfortunately, but I am committed to the solidarity and the continuing of building power that will not only help the Palestinian people, but will help marginalized people across the world who have had to endure the impact of U.S. foreign policy.
I believe that Jeremy Corbyn has got a question for you, Linda, as well.
Linda, thanks for what you said and the way you put it. It seems to me kind of strange as an observer of the United States that the radical movements in the USA got together to support the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s were crucial in opposing the Vietnam War, and indeed helped to bring an end to the Vietnam War. I was there during the opposition to the Iraq War, and there were some incredible demonstrations, marches, and things I went on, which helped to sort of frame the political debate around Iraq. But I've always found it very odd the way in which all that anti-racist movements, solidarity movements have not so far brought Palestine center stage. Now, I'm impressed with the statements that have been made by various members of Congress and very encouraged by that. I think that that is really very good indeed. But do you think that there's going to be the same kind of movements in the Senate and in the House as there were, which helped to bring legislative change to the anti-apartheid movement, various bills that were put through at that time? Do you think the same kind of movement will have that effect in solidarity with the people of Palestine? And are people across the USA totally shocked by what they've seen on their screens in the last few days? Because nobody in the world that has either access to a radio or a television can be unaware of what's happened in Palestine over the last week.
I appreciate that, Mr. Corbin. I am in a state of mind and that I'm just going to tell you the truth. The truth is that in the United States of America, we have what we call progressives except for Palestine. People who are excellent around talking about white supremacy and addressing white supremacy, supporting undocumented immigrants in the United States, and even supporting marginalized people in other parts of the world. But when it comes to Palestine, a line gets drawn. And let me tell you why that line gets drawn here. It is actually quite dangerous to be a very loud pro-Palestinian voice in the United States. In fact, there was an article that came out about me that I didn't know. It was a breaking news that Sheldon Adelson, who, as you know, now is rotting in hell somewhere, was spending millions of dollars to silence voices like mine. I was an example, including building dossiers, doing investigations and private investigations on our families. We have watched people literally be fired from national television, like Mark Lamont Hill, people who have lost livelihood in the United States just for standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, even within philanthropy, we have watched organizations, including Black-led organizations like, for example, the Dream Defenders out of Florida, who have actually taken delegations to Palestine of Black activists to try to build those solidarity and relationships, be defunded for their very principled stances on Palestine. And so it is difficult here in the United States. It's difficult for people in Congress to speak up. And I'm not making excuses, because I'm a person that believes that you should speak truth to power no matter the consequences. The consequences, unfortunately, are tall here in the United States. But what I do believe is something that Dr. King said, you know, Mr. Corbin, may not see the promised land, but I do believe that I have the responsibility and that the movements have the responsibility to plant those seeds in hopes that we will come to the place that you're speaking of, which is a Senate and a Congress who is empathetic to the Palestinian people, who center justice and who center equity around the world, who believe in diplomacy over war. I believe that those days are coming. We have proved, at least in a very short period of time, maybe just within the last 4 years, maybe 6 years, that we do have the power when Black and brown people, marginalized people organize together, that we can elect progressives who are going to say free Palestine, who are going to stand with the Palestinian people, but also people who believe in Medicare for all, people who believe in access to higher education. And so we found that the kind of politics of someone like Bernie Sanders was actually much broader than just Senator Bernie Sanders. And he really gave courage to a lot of people running for office to start putting those values on the table. And so we've only been through 2-3 mid-year election cycles, and there's many more to come. But I do see that hope. I mean, watching members of Congress on the House floor just shows us that what is the potential. And to your point, unfortunately, the Palestinian people are not being taught in public schools in America. In fact, in the state of California, we have been in a long-term fight where their opposition pro-Israel lobby has tried to remove Palestine and Arab American studies from the larger curriculum around Arab American studies, around minority studies, ethnic studies. So even when we are saying, listen, all we want for you is to educate about the communities we come from in the same way that you educate about others, everything we do here in the States requires a fight. Our Palestinian communities are fighting in Palestine, and they also have to fight here, and our allies have to fight with us. So again, The work is happening. The organizing is happening. The Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives, has centered and endorsed the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. We have seen a lot more integration of Palestine as the current global social justice issue of our time. We see a lot of comparisons with South African apartheid fight, and people basically saying, if you would have stood up against South African apartheid, then this is your moment now on Palestine. And so again, there's a lot of work to be done. I've been doing this work for 2 decades now, and I have seen the progress. And unfortunately, until we figure out how to build the same type of organizing, the same type of consistency, and also to invest the same type of money as we have seen the pro-Israel lobby, we're not going to move as fast as we can. But what I am seeing, Mr. Corbin, that I think is so heartwarming and really hopeful here is that the entire pro-Israel propaganda machine in the United States of America is literally crumbling before our very eyes. I mean, we have watched celebrities and athletes and people who never, ever brought up Palestine, said anything about Palestine, coming out. We are watching organizations that never had the courage to even mention Palestine talk about Palestine. And the most beautiful part is watching young Jewish progressives, young Jews who are literally risking their own positions within their larger community, coming out, organizing events, leading conversations, lobbying Congress, standing in solidarity with our movements here, and really centering the voices of Palestinians. And so I'm encouraged, but again, so much more work to do.
Thanks for watching this clip from DDN Live. If you want to watch the whole video, simply click the link below. But most importantly, support the incredible work of Double Down News by visiting their Patreon page and becoming a patron now. Join the future of journalism, support alternative analysis to the mainstream media.